Hi everyone, this is video 5 series of our study 9990 syllabus for paper 1 and paper 2. In this video we're looking at the 3 studies that have to do with the social approach. Okay, so in paper 1 it's very likely that you'll be able to, or you'll be asked to evaluate a question worth 8 or 10 points. First of all, if you didn't watch any of my other videos, I'm going to tell you, go watch those videos. Second, the very first thing that you should be doing when you open up your paper 1 is heading to the back. You want to do the very last large questions first. Research over the past 10 plus years has shown that students who do the last question first have a higher rate of passing. Okay, so we're going to do that first. But what if you were asked to evaluate one of these studies for its approach? Okay, there are strengths and weaknesses which you need to know of these approaches, as well as our regular vocab. So strength of social approach, it tends to be a holistic approach, as it usually looks at different levels of explanation. So holistic is an overview, like a very broad overview. We can discover how we are likely to behave in social situations. We follow a script we have learned from society about society. So the social approach is basically, it's talking about how we learn from our environment, from our peers. Actually, if you want to get down to it, the social approach as humans, as kids, we look to adults. Adults are our saviors. And when we lack adults in our lives, we have to replace that with something to help us survive. Because we have to learn how to survive. And that's when, a lot of kids depend on their peers for things when they don't have adults or sturdy adults in their life that they can depend on. That's a little out of topic here, but social approach, there are weaknesses associated with social approach. So societal knowledge may become redundant as society changes. So I think I said this before in another video about the fact that human behavior is always changing. Society is always changing. What society deems as normal is always changing. Okay, something that is not normal today might be normal tomorrow. We don't know. It's all just has to do with fads, right? It's crazy human behavior we live in. Crazy. Social behavior is necessarily culture bound. Therefore, a study conducted in one culture may say little or nothing about any other culture. So in these social approaches, the studies that we are talking about tend to generalize to that area. Okay, so let's start with Pilyavin and Subway Samaritan. Now, this took place in 1969. This is the social approach. Basically, we are looking at how bystander behavior is in real life situations and factors that affect their desire to help, including the diffusion of responsibility. So diffusion of responsibility and bystander effect are different. Diffusion of responsibility is a mathematical equation that basically tells you how much responsible you are for a situation. So for example, if you are next to someone who is laying on the ground not breathing and you are the only one there, you are 100% responsible. So you're more likely to do something about it. But if there are 10 other people there, you are only 10% responsible and you are less likely to do something about it. Okay, so know the difference between in that diffusion of responsibility and bystander theory is basically saying that we stand by instead of helping. All right, so for whatever reason we see someone in help or need, and our our brain tells us why we should or should not help, and helps us with excuses to help us feel a little bit better inside. All right, you don't want to be a hypocrite in any way. But okay, so what you should know about this experience a little different is the experimenters were groups of 4 kids. There were always 2 males and always 2 females in the group. The 2 females were always the observers. One of the males was always the victim, and one of the males was always a model. Now, in one of the groups, now everybody was white except one of the males that played one of the victims. He was black. Now, our aim was to investigate the behavior of bystanders in natural setting, because all the previous work, all the background information that was done on this was done in a laboratory setting. It was done with people. I remember people were on phone calls and they heard someone on the other end that was in distress. We wanted to see if they would get up and go help them. Another experiment that this was based off of was these 3 gentlemen were like sitting in a classroom and they were like filling out a questionnaire, and smoke started to like billow out from underneath the door. And everybody went like this, and they looked at everyone else, and nobody was moving, and everyone just kept filling out the paperwork, and nobody else moved, so nobody moved. Nobody thought it was a threat, so nobody moved. It was kind of crazy. All right, so we are looking at different independent variables here, okay, in this study. We have the type of victim, the race of the victim, the behavior of the model, the size of the group of the bystanders. All of these things mattered, okay? But specifically, what was our specific independent variables of the study? Okay, so you either had a victim that was drunk or ill. The victim was either black or white. The model was either close or distant. And the model either came early or late. Okay, so if that makes sense. So you either have a victim that was drunk or ill. That drunk or ill victim was either black or white. The model citizen either came from a close distance away or came from the adjacent cart away. And the model either came really quickly or waited 150 seconds before they came to help. Okay? Now, we have an experimental, a field experiment, and it is with natural observations. So our participants were not aware, they were completely naive that they were even in this experiment. And we have independent groups. Okay, so just think about it. Our participants, they go to get on this subway. We're in the Bronx, Harlem, Bronx, and we are on this subway that is taking us from, 59th Street to 125th Street. It's a 7.5 minute ride. Basically, the door is shut, and 70 seconds into this journey, the experiment starts every single time. And that involves the victim falling on the floor. All right. Now, our passengers, they were traveling during the week between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m., just normal time. They were somewhere between, Harlem and the Bronx. I'm going to say it is an opportunity sample, and that is because those people I'm not going to say it's a volunteer sample. I'm going to say it's an opportunity because our participants had to go there. All right. Some people might say that our participants volunteered by getting on the train, but they didn't know that there was an experiment. So it's hard to say that they volunteered for anything. It's easier to say that it was an opportunity sample by the participants. It was the best opportunity for them to gain participants and basically keep them in this enclosed area. Okay. Now, the results. Majority of helpers were male. 80% of the victims received spontaneous help. Both black and white ill victims were equally as likely to receive help. Same race helping was found in drunk trials. So that means if it was a black victim and he was drunk, it was more likely that someone that was black helped him. And if they were white and they were drunk, it was more likely that someone who was white would help him first. But overall, people were more likely to help a man who was ill more than they were likely to help a man who was drunk. The number is actually 62 out of 65 times the ill person fell, they were helped, and 19 out of 38 the drunk person. Okay. Some other things that you kind of should probably know about this study is those intervals of this adjacent car and you know, the time, the waiting, like I had said in the independent variables, the early or late, the critical or adjacent. So basically, people came to help spontaneously, like I just said. So we didn't need to use the critical late category. Basically, so our participant fell on the floor, and then we would wait like 70 seconds, and our model citizen would come in, you know, right away to help if nobody spontaneously helped. But the late stage was we'd wait 150 seconds. And basically the participants said that people got really, really uncomfortable to the point where they were talking more. But it was more likely that once one person helped, once that model citizen helped, other people joined in. And they never really experienced a lot of those late trials because people came to help spontaneously. It was like the more time that went by without someone helping, kind of people were a little bit more uncomfortable and more likely to help. Okay. Now we have, how many people do we have in this city? A large number. Why don't I have it written down on here? What is it, like? Oh my God. Okay, that's 4,450 participants in this study. 55% were white, 45% were black. I think there was one Asian in the group, but they didn't make the cut. Okay, now, before we get into the evaluation of this study, very good standardized procedures, by the way. But how did this even happen? Like, why are we even talking about the bystander theory? Like, where did it even come from? You guys need to look up Kitty Genovese. Kitty Genovese. She was a woman. Basically, her story goes like this. She worked at a bar really late at night. She was walking home around midnight. Someone attacked her on the street, and she was screaming and hollering. And then some guy yelled out the window, and the guy escaped and left. She made it inside the door. He came back and raped her and attacked her. And, you know, she lived in this apartment building with like 38 people who apparently watched. And this became this huge thing in the news because they said, how was it that this woman was murdered in front of all these people and no one came to help her? It actually turned out that there were only maybe like 10 witnesses, maybe even less. But, I mean, it sparked this whole crap load of research on the bystander theory and diffusion of responsibility. So, let's just get into this. The participants were all subway passengers in New York. And even though there were a lot of them, it's not a representative sample. It's very, it's located in one small area. So the culture of that area is heavily influenced in this social theory. Therefore, we cannot generalize this study to a broad group of people. Reliability. The main recorded measurement of the bystander helping was the number of helpers and how long it took them to help. So again, the bystander, we were thinking the more people on the train, the less likely people were to help. And the more people that were on the train, the less people on the train, the more likely you were to help. That's what we were thinking. But that was all skewed basically because people came to help. But you also have to think about this. They were trapped on that train. They couldn't get off at all. So, I mean, the ethics of that is pretty crappy. Okay, did they have the right to withdraw? I don't think so. But at the same time, they didn't have the chance to leave. All right? They were made to help. Maybe they were made to help. Okay? So, what is the point of understanding this? How can we apply this to the real world? Well, if you understand this theory, if you can be aware that this exists, that we are less likely to help if there are more people around, maybe you can cognitively recognize that everyone else is thinking the same thing, and therefore someone is going to walk away without getting any help. Okay? Like, think about it. If there's an axe murderer and you're walking around down the street with 5 of your friends, and he grabs one of you, and the 4 of you run because you think, oh, well, shit, there's 4 of us. It's likely that someone else is going to go back and help, or I'm leaving, and everyone else has that same idea. Oh, there's plenty more people that'll help. So in knowing this, what can we do? We can change our own behavior. We can get rid of the bystander theory. We can completely get rid of diffusion of responsibility, because awareness, bringing awareness to this, can change. That's how human behavior changes. We bring awareness to our own behavior, and then it mutates somehow. So this study had good ecological validity. The participants were ordinary train passengers. They were naturally doing what they would do every single day. They were naive. They didn't know they were part of the study. Okay. But unfortunately, there was like no controls. We couldn't control anything except for the fact that the doors closed and people couldn't leave. So there were really lack of controls, although there were some good standardized procedures. We have no idea if any of our participants were repeat offenders, if you want to say it, because we did the same experiment on the same trains, the same times, in the summer months, not the same day every single day, but around the same days, around the same time. So it's very possible that there were people that saw this happen often, and that's maybe why there was a lot of helping that went on, but that's going to lower our validity. Now, the ethics, okay? Horrible ethics, horrible ethics. There's deception, no informed consent, no right to withdraw. There was the psychological harm. It's everything. Okay. You think this is a sound experiment? This is so unethical that it could not be replicated. How would we replicate this study in an ethical way? All right. Yeah. So Pilyavin, it was a very sound, really good experiment for a field experiment. It's really hard to get this much control in a field experiment. They did really well, but the ethics sucked a little bit. And honestly, they didn't even debrief. They could have at least debriefed. What if they could have played something over the announcements? They could have put maybe a sign on the subway that day that said there will be experiments going on, like something. There could have been something more. All right. Okay. Milgram. Let's talk about Milgram, obedient behavior. This is 1963 in our social approach. This is the conflict between individuals' conscience and obedience to authority. And it considers how far a person would go to obey instructions that involve hurting another person. This is all the background of this. This is all based on World War II. This is based on Hitler and the Nazis, and how could people obey orders to the point that they were actually killing and destruction of another human being, another race, this genocide, okay? How could they turn around and just say that they were just following orders? Okay, but think about it. Like, before we even start this, we grow up in a society where we are punished if we don't obey. I mean, how does it not make sense to anyone that we would grow up and obey orders like that? Because we are, as a child, your parents are happy when you obey them. So you learn that obedience makes your life a hell of a lot easier. Unfortunately. I'm trying to change that, though. We're trying to change that. Okay, so we have a dispositional hypothesis in Milgram's study. Basically, this dispositional hypothesis states that German citizens possessed some defective personal traits which made such extreme levels of obedience possible. That is saying that there's individual differences within the German race that made them do what they did to kill other races, Jewish races and stuff. The situational hypothesis in this study says many people who found themselves in similar situations would harm or even kill under the orders of an authority figure. So this hypothesis, situational hypothesis, is basically saying anybody would have done what the Germans did if they were put in the same crappy environment. I mean, think about in World War II when this stuff was going down. Well, think about it. The Germans were just lost World War I, and the morale was down, and I believe Hitler was, I think he was hit with mustard gas at the end of World War I, and he ended up in the hospital. He, had to rehabilitate and everything. And then what ended up happening is he really wanted to go back and fight, but the war was done. But he was given some special type of special ops of some sort, where he was to go into this underground kind of gathering and kind of make sure that these people weren't trying to overthrow the government, kind of say, or the military. So he went to these meetings where people were saying like, go Germany, our people aren't fighting, we need to fight for ourselves, blah, blah, blah. Basically like an underground military was forming. And he was supposed to be there to report back to his guy. Now, he went there one day, and the morale of that group was low. Okay? Like, people were like, screw this, we can't do this, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know what happened. Like, something switched on with Hitler, and he was like, what do you mean? We can do this. It's almost like he was brainwashed through going there, thinking that they could overrun the government and things like that. And then when people decided that they couldn't do it, he stepped up and he spoke over the leader of that group and got everyone to agree on one thing. And he basically became their leader of this small group. And from there, everyone followed him. Okay. Now, they obeyed him. They followed him. I mean, they didn't realize he was from Austria, like from Germany, all kinds of wrong stuff with this situation. Okay. Now, the methods: we have a controlled lab experiment with observations. We don't have an independent variable. All of our participants experienced the same exact trials. So our dependent variable is going to be the maximum voltage that's given by our participants to Mr. Wallace. Okay, so our sample, we have volunteers. I think there's like 40 white males, average age 20 to 50 years old. They responded to an ad in the newspaper for a study on learning and memory, and they were going to get paid for this. I think it was only like $3.50 or something like that, which is, basically maybe like $30 now. Okay, because that was back in the 60s. So the procedures of the study are very, very important for you to understand. Every time a participant came through, they were sat down next to Mr. Wallace. They were made to think that they could either be the teacher or the learner, okay? But every time, they were always the teacher. Mr. Wallace, they pulled him in the back, and the teacher watched Mr. Wallace get hooked up to the shock machine. They witnessed the one test shock to show that it's real. All the same procedures were done to every single participant. There was only one condition, the same condition. All right. So this apparatus that was used is really important. It's a shock machine, except it wasn't real. It was just a box. There was nothing real on it. It went from 15 to 450 volts, and it went up in increments of 15. Now, when Mr. Wallace sat down, or they sat down, they gave the teacher a 45 volt test shock so that they could basically prove to them that the shock machine was real, and they wanted to just give them a test to be like, oh, that didn't hurt too much, right? Okay, so know that all these procedures, these standardized procedures, like I said, sitting down with Mr. Wallace, pulling the lots for being teacher or learner, getting that 45 volt shock, these are all controls. You're going to need to know these controls for the exam. They're going to ask you controls of Milgram. They always do. They're always asking about Milgram. Milgram is like crazy, crazy study. Great study. Great. Okay. Now, it's getting late here. Okay, what were the results of the study? Okay, so let's see. Participants were asked to rate the level of pain and the shock of 0 to 14. They scored it a 13.42. So they knew that the shock machine hurt. All right, just throwing that out there. The mean voltage given to all the participants was 368. That was the average. 368 volts. Okay. 14 out of the 40 people were nervous, laughing, smiling. Okay, this is all qualitative behavior that we are gathering, because remember, it's all filmed. You can go watch this whole experiment on YouTube. 26 out of the 40 went all the way to 450 volts. Mind you, 450 volts had XXX under it, okay? They knew it was bad. They still went there. 26 out of 40, that's like 62% of the people killed Mr. Wallace, okay? 62% of our participants went all the way. Know that number. Stressful situation is due to the internal conflict of the need to obey authority, but also to do no harm. So they realized that, man, once the participants realized that they were not going to have to accept the consequences of what was happening, they were like a puppet. Anything you said, they would do. If you go watch those videos, you'll see the second, every time the participant says, what's going to happen to this man if I kill him? And the experimenter says, it's my responsibility. Then the teacher says, okay. And it's almost like they're numb and they're just hitting the buzzer and hitting the buzzer and hitting the buzzer. Like they don't become a person anymore. They have to cognitively get it out of their system in order for them to move on. Okay. It's very hard. And people say, oh, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. But I watched an interview of these men when they were in their 70s after this experiment was done. And they said that they were very grateful that they were part of this experiment, because in a perfect world, they said, obviously they would never do that. But to be part of an experiment where they've just proved that they would kill another human, that gave them a lot of insight on themselves and their own behavior. And, why do we behave the way that we behave? Are we just robots? Are we just going through the motions? Do we even understand why do you keep your leftovers? Do you even understand that? Okay, start to question your own behavior. All right, why are things happening? Why do you do things? Okay, let's evaluate this. It's not a great study, but it is a pilot study. Okay, so it is the first of its kind. That's why we use pilot studies. We don't have previous information. We didn't even have another experimental condition of this for this study. Okay, participants were all male and they came from a small localized area and they all were volunteers, so there is some motivational bias. This is not a generalizable study. Let's see. So we did have levels of procedure put in place for every single participant. So this study is very replicable. And actually this study was replicated again, but they changed the environment. And then the study was replicated again, but they changed the clothing on the proctor or the professional in the room. And by changing the environment, the obedience rate went down. By changing the clothes on the proctor, the obedience rate went down. So by having these standardized procedures in place, we were able to replicate this study and get better results. Application. People are much more obedient to authority than reasonably expected. So this basically throws caution to those in power on how to use their authority. It's definitely not good for stranger danger for kids. Okay. So I tell people this all the time as a behaviorist. Don't say to your kids, don't talk to strangers. Okay. Because that doesn't give them answers. What if they're lost and everyone is a stranger? Who do they talk to? Okay. You shouldn't be saying don't talk to strangers. You need to give them an answer like who to talk to. Okay. Look for a grandmother. Look for someone with kids. Look for someone who works there. Okay, something like that. All right, just leaving it at don't talk to strangers, not going to work. So the validity of the study, I'm going to say it has low validity. Internal validity, we didn't have much of a structure. There were controls, so I'll say our internal validity was pretty good due to the controls, which was the same procedure for everyone. But our ecological validity was low. Like, what are the chances that you're going to go to a prestigious university and someone is going to tell you to kill another individual? Okay, very, very low on that. Our participants did not consent to the study on obedience. It was for learning and memory. Remember that. Participants were repeatedly deceived throughout the entire study. Okay, they were made to believe that they were actually killing another human being. This is psychologically draining, okay, psychological harm, but our participants were debriefed. The biggest dilemma in this study is whether or not our participants felt that they had the right to withdraw. Because in the beginning of the study, before it even started, once they got there, they were actually told that they could leave the study at any time, and they would still get paid. But throughout the study, the prompts that were given to our teacher were, you must stay, you must continue, the experiment requires you to continue. So in those moments, they may have felt that they didn't have the opportunity to leave or to stop. And when they said they wanted to stop, the professional told them that they couldn't. Okay, so that's a very big debatable question in this study. All right. We are headed to our very last study. This is Yamamoto, chimpanzee helping, altruism, altruistic behavior. This is found in the animal kingdom. I did so much studies on what is actual altruism. Can you actually do something altruistic and not have any personal gain? Very questionable. It's easier to see in animals, and specifically we use chimpanzees. Don't say monkeys. Monkeys have tails. We use chimpanzees in this. All right, so this is a social approach. Prosocial behavior and instrumental helping in chimpanzees, and looking at whether chimps have the ability to help others based on specific needs. So prosocial, it just means like social, normal, acceptable behavior amongst species. Okay, and that's what conspecific means, like within your own species. So you'll see that word in here. You're going to really, really want to study animal ethics. Again, if you're going to be asked a question on animal ethics, it's going to be either this one or a pepper bird. Okay, it's probably going to be this one. There's more animals and more handling going on. Altruism, if you didn't know, is acting helpful towards another with no obvious benefit to yourself. Okay, and that's kind of what we're doing here. We have one chimpanzee helping another chimpanzee gain access to some yummy juice, and that first chimpanzee isn't getting anything from it. Okay, so we basically want to know if chimpanzees, the aim of the study is whether chimpanzees can understand the needs of conspecifics, or can understand the needs of others in their own species without language of any sort. Okay, we have a laboratory experiment with a repeated measures design. Our independent variable is can see or cannot see. So we have these boxes, it's divided, there's a divider. In the can see condition, it is completely clear, and you can see that the other chimp on the other side is trying to get some juice. Whether there's two ways they can get it. They can either they need a straw, where they can put the straw through a hole and drink the juice, or they need a stick, where they're going to go and take the stick and pull the juice towards them. Okay. Our dependent variable, the targeted helping behavior, which was operationalized as the item offered by the participant to the conspecific. And we're only looking at the item that was offered first. Okay. So our sample, we have 5 chimpanzees. They are a mother and baby pair, and I can't remember their names right now, but I remember Cap, C-A-P, and I think like Chloe and something else. I'm not even gonna lie to you because I don't have all their names here, but it is important to know some of these chimps' names. Okay, C-A-P. Remember, CAP. So there's a group of mother babies that had C names, a group that had A names. A Yumu, yeah, my gosh. Okay, a Yumu is that is the chimp that you need to remember the name. Pan and Pal are the other ones. Okay, yes, I do most of this from my head, believe it or not. Okay, now the reason there's only 5 is because the Cleo and Chloe group, okay, we're only taking data on the chimpanzee that is getting the tools and passing them over. The mother chimp in the Cleo Chloe group never went over to the side where she had to hand the tools over. So technically, only 5 chimps were actually measured. Okay. All right. So a chimp had to select a tool that would help the other chimp to solve a problem. One task involved a stick, which 24 tasks involved a stick and 24 tasks involved a straw. All right. 7 objects were placed in the booth with the chimp, and basically there was a hole that they could pass the objects through. Now, like I just said, if it was can see, it was clear, but if it was cannot see, it was completely opaque. They couldn't see through the wall. The only thing they had was like a hole like this for them to pass the stuff through. Okay. Now, I do remember them asking a question on the exam one time, which they probably won't ask it again, but they asked name something odd that one of the chimps did. And I know one of the chimps that starts with a P did something interesting, but a Yumu also did something interesting. It's the only chimp that actually succeeded in the cannot see condition, but that was because she looked in the little hole to see what her partner needed. But in doing that, we kind of took that trial to the can see because she technically saw. All right, so she's a little smart cookie, that one. Okay, so they had 8 5-minute trials with the objects, with the 7 objects. They got to play with them. They had no task required, and 5% of the trials, they just automatically passed tools through the hole, even though they weren't supposed to. All right, so there were 48 trials total. I told you 24 involved a stick, 24 involved a straw. They did the can see condition, and then they did the cannot see condition, and then they went back quickly and did the can see condition just to make sure. We call that an ABA trial. It's where we do trial A, and then we do trial B, and trial B is usually different than A, and then we come back and introduce A to see if we got the same results that we did the first time. All right, because we want to make sure that B is not influencing anything else. Now, conclusions. They will offer conspecific help to those who require it in the majority of cases, but usually as a response to a request. So if you watch some video footage, there's not a lot. It's only like maybe 2 minutes total. You'll see that a majority of the time, the chimp inside the box that needed the juice, they would put their hand out like this, like asking the other chimp to hand them over some tools. So they were prompted. So our conclusions are saying that they will help, but they have to be prompted first. Okay? Chimpanzees rely on visual confirmation of conspecific needs in order to offer targeted help. So this just means they have to see what is going on in order to know what the other chimp needs. Okay? That's like empathy, guys. That's like if you see another human and you don't talk to that human, you just know what they need because you can see their demeanor, you can see their situation, you understand, you can put yourself in their shoes. Oh, they're looking for their car. If they're like out in Target parking lot, like going like this, hitting their remote, you're like, oh, they're looking for their car. But like if you didn't see anything and you just heard a car beeping, you might think it was a car alarm. You might not know someone actually needs help to find their car, right? All right, now let's evaluate this study. There were only 5 chimps, and these chimps were from the University of Kyoto, Japan. They were already part of research, so you could generalize this to animals that are in captivity, but you cannot generalize this to animals that are in the wild. The reliability. There were high levels of controls. For example, the presentation of the objects on the trays was the same for each trial. Chimps sat at the same booth at each trial. These measures all increase reliability. Application. So, basically, if we can understand that children, or that, so apes have a comparison in their mentality to like 3 to 5 year old children. So what we can learn from this is how children in that age group think empathically. Like, are they visually aware of their surroundings? Do they understand situations? Have they been in the situations? Do they have emotional awareness? Okay, so emotional awareness is a big one with this. Okay, it has to do with empathy, not just altruism. Do we know what the other person needs? Are we willing to go and help them for no reason? Validity. Since it was a repeated measures design, the chimps participated in both the independent variables, reducing the risk of individual differences and increasing internal validity. But at the same time, it increased domain characteristics, because if they were on the side that the juice, they knew what they needed when they were passing it over. They knew it was either stick or the straw, because they had already experienced it on the other side of what they needed, right? I'm going to also say that, okay, for wild chimps, ecological validity sucked. But if we're talking about captive chimps, they grew up in the setting. This is what they're used to. So this has good ecological validity for captive chimpanzees. Last thing is our ethics. The study was approved by the Animal Care Committee. They had their basic needs. They didn't use a lot of chimpanzees. They were all caged in pairs with their mother child for bonding. So they weren't kept in solitude and they weren't lonely and things like that. They had adequate food and water. So this was a very sound experiment when it came to animal ethics. Okay. So again, if you're studying animal ethics, I would look at this. All right, guys. So that concludes the basics for our paper 1 AS level psychology. I will do some more videos in the future, in the recent future, for paper 2, but this series of videos is now over for paper 1. Go back through and study them, and then in another video, we will talk about paper 2 research methods and how to create and design our own study. Thank you so much, and good luck, everyone. Study that vocab. I have Kahoots available. It's Morin 207. I will put the link below. Go study my Kahoots. I also have a psychology on Quizlet. Go find that as well. Okay? Good luck.